Is President Obama's broad coalition against ISIS a coalition in name only? We'll ask the panel after a quick break.
This will be a unified coalition. It's one operation. It'll be under a common command. And we will continue to welcome the involvement of partners who will make different contributions based on their capacity, based on their varying political circumstances.
The president needs to get out of the way here in terms of allowing the types of decisive actions that need to be taken, in terms of the air campaign and in terms of arming those Kurds and Arabs that want to do the fighting.
What about the coalition against ISIS, how it's developing, what exactly they're contributing, these other countries? The president saying it is now more than 40, but what are they doing? And what about the latest in this back and forth? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. The administration, Steve, is going to great lengths to list countries, not going to great lengths to list what each country is doing.
Right, and that is the most important thing about the coalition, as we've talked about here before. What is the coalition actually going to do? What's it going to accomplish? And how does the coalition, the work of the coalition, fit within the broader context of taking out ISIS, degrading and destroying ISIS? It's unclear at this point how exactly those roles are going to be divided, but we are starting to see splits where you have coalition partners like, I think, following the United States lead, saying, here's what we won't do. So you have the President of the United States saying, we won't be putting boots on the ground. You have the French saying, in effect, we won't be striking in Syria. You have a number of coalition partners saying, here's what we're not going to do, rather than saying, here's what we're going to do because it's crucial that we take out ISIS.
A.B., the Secretary of State was at the UN today, and he also opened the door for Iran to be a part of this coalition.
Well, I think that we're going to get a better sense of the coalition in the next 2 weeks when the UN General Assembly meets and more decisions are made. Right now, things are fluid because, let's face it, there's a lot of palpable doubt about the efficacy of the strategy on the ground. If we say that we're not going to provide our own ground forces, we're calling on the Kurds, we're calling on the Iraqi forces that we have always openly doubted and said are not dependable, couldn't stand up when we stood down, and then of course a bunch of rebels in Syria that we have now quote-unquote vetted after all these years of saying they were questionable, who are commingled with al-Nusra out of necessity and whose ultimate goal actually is not to attack ISIS but to take out Assad. So there's questions about the goals of this and the efficacy of what we're going to be doing on the ground. Countries don't want to get on board, neither do Republicans and Democrats on the record, with something that isn't going to work. And so Steve's right. As long as he keeps saying what isn't going to work, you saw Congressman Royce's frustration. He says he just needs to get out of the way. I mean, he's the commander-in-chief. He makes these decisions. He doesn't get out of the way. So ultimately, I think we're going to see people revealing their frustrations and their questions. We can't join this coalition unless we know it's going to work.
Yeah. France drops bombs in Iraq, but puts their own red line, right, Rouge, and says, we're not dropping bombs in Syria. So the question then to Susan Rice was, is this going to be some kind of dual coalition, one for Iraq and one for Syria?
Well, her answer is a farcical one. This will be a unified coalition. It will be one operation under a common command. Well, of course it will. Thus far, we have one country in the coalition. It isn't hard to get a unified command with that. And this one country hit one target, and because it's not going to hit anything in Syria, it's going to operate on its own. There isn't a coalition. The idea that it's going to be a dual one or a spread out one is ridiculous. There's nobody here. Nobody showed up. There's one Air Force in the air with a pinprick attack, a single one. The British are worried, and they've sent mixed signals. The Arabs are nowhere to be seen, and this invitation to Iran to join us would completely undermine the idea of the coalition, the at least aspirational coalition, to bring in the Sunni Arabs. The whole idea is to legitimize a campaign against the Sunni insurgency, Sunni radicals, by having Sunni Arab states on our side, like the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs, who wouldn't even attend the Paris conference had Iran attended. So it undermines everything. And the one item I'd add about the unity of command, we don't even have it within the United States. The front page story in the Washington Post of how the generals and the president can't even agree on the strategy, and that's in one country that's supposed to be leading all this.
This is a very public back and forth between the White House and the Pentagon. You've seen former Defense Secretary Bob Gates come out about boots on the ground. Other generals, retired and current, speak about that. Now, this weekend, 60 Minutes has an interview with former CIA Director and former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, in which he will say the U.S. should not have pulled out all of its troops out of Iraq in 2011 and should have armed and trained the rebels in Syria when they tried to do it the first time. Take a listen.
Were you confident in that moment that pulling out was the right thing to do?
No, I wasn't. I really thought that it was important for us to maintain a presence in Iraq.
Goes on to say, Steve, that he fought to have these rebels armed and trained at the very beginning against Assad, and the pushback was the president, who wasn't sure where the weapons were going to go.
Well, we've certainly known that about Leon Panetta and arming the Syrian rebels, along with several other people, senior people in the administration, right? But this is new that Leon Panetta is saying as emphatically as he is that he opposed the withdrawal of all U.S. troops there. You know, I don't have any idea how hard he fought behind the scenes, but one hopes that he fought pretty hard. And I was surprised at the time that we didn't have any high-profile resignations. I mean, this is something that's so important to U.S. national security. He certainly seems to suggest as much now. And yet nobody's leaving. And the irony of the situation is we're about to repeat this mistake in Afghanistan. You have the president in his speech the other day at MacDill Air Force Base say that he wants to bring the war in Afghanistan to a responsible end. The exact same language that he used 3 years ago about the war in Iraq when he drew down to nothing. We're going to do this all again. We haven't learned our lesson.
Maybe.
Well, I think that, you know, Steve raises a good question. I think if you really believe something like that, maybe it's worth resigning and not waiting until you've left the administration to talk about it. But it's been clear through other reporting that Gates and Petraeus and Hillary Clinton and others actually did support a stronger effort against Assad earlier, and he only came around later. It's entirely possible that President Obama is not going to be successful, but as you can see with the fact that he wants authorization for every strike himself, he is owning this, and he wants to be in complete control, and he thinks it's the right thing to do.
To the detriment, what you hear privately, of the generals who are going to have to be in control, at least in their part of it, from the Pentagon and elsewhere.
Lyndon Johnson, who had a lot more experience, was also the one who directed airstrikes into North Korea, and there's a universal agreement. It was a catastrophe, and Obama, with zero experience, having now gone against the Secretary of Defense, generals on Iraq and on Syria to a disastrous effect, is going to be in charge of the air campaign. That's really scary stuff.
Next up, the Friday Lightning Round.